Christmas dinner, the kind you see in magazines. Turkey golden and glistening under the chandelier. Wine glasses catching the light. Laughter bouncing off the walls. My daughter's dining room looked perfect. Everything was perfect. Until my son-in-law raised his glass, looked straight at me across that table, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your old job was a joke." The room erupted. Not uncomfortable chuckles. Real laughter. Deep, genuine laughter. Like he'd just told the funniest thing they'd ever heard. My daughter, Emily. She touched his arm, gentle, almost apologetic. But not to me, to him. "It's Christmas, Dad," she said, her voice soft, pleading. "Don't start anything." Like I was the problem. Like I was the one who'd just thrown the punch. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even look up from my plate. I just kept cutting my turkey, chewing slowly, letting them have their moment. Because here's what they didn't know, that old job they were laughing about. They had no idea what it really was. They never asked. They never cared to know. And the next morning, they were going to find out exactly what happens when you mock the foundation you've been standing on your whole life. My name is Robert. Robert Hayes. I'm 68 years old. To the neighbors in this quiet suburb of Denver, Colorado, I'm just another retiree. The old guy who drives a beat-up 2012 Chevy Silverado with a dent in the passenger door. The one who wears flannel shirts with oil stains that won't come out no matter how many times you wash them. The one who spends Saturday mornings tinkering in his garage, fixing lawnmowers for free because, well, what else am I going to do with my time? They see me mowing the lawn in my worn-out work boots. They see me carrying groceries for my wife, Margaret, when her arthritis flares up. They wave. They smile. They think they know me. But here's the thing about assumptions. They're comfortable. They're easy. And they're almost always wrong. What they don't know, what nobody in this neighborhood knows, is that for 35 years, I worked in transportation logistics. That's what I told people when they asked. I move things from one place to another. Simple. Honest. True. But incomplete. Because what I actually did was build one of the largest freight coordination networks in the Rocky Mountain region. I didn't just move cargo. I controlled the routes. I owned the contracts. I built the infrastructure that kept goods flowing across 6 states. But I never talked about it. I never bragged. I drove my old truck. I wore my old boots. I kept my mouth shut and my head down. Because the moment you start talking about money, people change. Family changes. They start seeing you differently. They start seeing dollar signs instead of a father, a bank account instead of a grandfather. My daughter, Sarah, grew up watching me leave before sunrise and come home after dark. She saw the dirt under my nails. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes. She saw a man who worked with his hands. And somewhere along the way, she decided that kind of work wasn't enough, wasn't impressive, wasn't worth respecting. I don't blame her for wanting more. I wanted more for her too. That's why I worked the way I did. That's why I paid for her college in full. No loans, no debt. That's why I bought her first car outright. That's why when she got married, I handed her the keys to a house I'd purchased 6 months earlier. Paid in cash. No mortgage, no strings. I wanted her to start her life without the weight I'd carried. I wanted her to have opportunities I never had. But here's what I learned about giving too much. When you remove every obstacle, when you smooth every path, people forget how to climb. They forget how to struggle. And worse, they forget to appreciate the hands that cleared the way. Sarah met him at a corporate networking event. His name is Derek Lawson. 42 years old. Vice President of Sales at some tech startup that sells cloud-based solutions I still don't fully understand. He wore expensive suits, drove a leased Tesla, had the kind of smile that looked practiced in a mirror, the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. At first, I tried to like him. I really did. He was polite at family dinners. He complimented Margaret's cooking. He talked about his career with the kind of enthusiasm that made it sound like he was changing the world. But there was something underneath. Something I couldn't quite name at first. It was in the way he looked at me. The way his eyes would glaze over when I spoke. The way he'd check his phone mid-conversation. Like whatever I was saying couldn't possibly be as important as whatever notification just buzzed in his pocket. The comments started small, little jabs wrapped in jokes. That kind of work doesn't really exist anymore, does it, Robert? Must have been tough back in the day, before everything went digital. Good thing we've moved past all that manual labor stuff. And every time, Sarah would laugh. Not a nervous laugh, a real one, like she agreed. I let it slide. I always let it slide. Because what was I supposed to do? Argue. Prove myself. Make a scene at Christmas dinner and confirm I was exactly what he thought I was. Some bitter old man stuck in the past, unable to accept that the world had moved on. So I played the role. The humble father, the grateful grandfather, the man who knew his place. I showed up for birthdays. I smiled for photos. I held my tongue when Derek talked about his deals, his clients, his strategies, like he was the first person to ever figure out how business works. But here's what Derek never asked. He never asked how I paid for Sarah's education. He never asked how I managed to buy her that house. He never asked why, even after I retired, I still had meetings, still had phone calls, still had people who needed to speak with me about contracts and logistics and distribution networks that spanned state lines. He just assumed I was living off a modest pension, assumed I'd saved a little money over the years, assumed I was small, forgettable, irrelevant. And I let him assume, because the truth is, I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his respect. I'd spent my entire life building something he couldn't see, something he didn't have the vision to understand. While Derek was focused on his LinkedIn profile and his quarterly bonuses, I was focused on foundations, on infrastructure, on leverage. I wasn't working for applause. I was working for control. And control, real control, is invisible until you need it. The years went by. The dynamic became clear. Derek was the golden boy, the success story, the one everyone admired at family gatherings. And I was the relic, the old man who'd done his best but never quite made it to their level. Sarah played her part too. She'd smile at me across the table. That same smile she'd given me since she was a little girl. But it wasn't the same anymore. There was something else behind it now. Something that looked like pity. Or maybe embarrassment. Like she loved me, but wished I was different. Wished I was more like him. I never confronted her about it. What would I say? Your husband disrespects me and you let him go. That would only make me look weak, bitter. So I stayed silent. I showed up. I played with my grandson, Tommy. I smiled for the photos, and I waited. Because here's the thing about foundations. You don't see them until something starts to collapse. You don't think about the load-bearing walls until the weight becomes too much. And Derek? He'd been standing on a structure he didn't even know existed. He thought his success was his own. He thought his career, his clients, his entire polished life was something he'd built with his own two hands. He had no idea how wrong he was. He had no idea that the contracts he bragged about, the deals he closed, the office building he walked into every single day, all of it was connected to a network I'd built decades ago. A network I still controlled. A network that, with one phone call, could disappear. But I wasn't ready to make that call yet. Not until I knew for sure. Not until the family betrayal was complete. Not until he crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And at that Christmas dinner, with that one comment, with that one joke, with my entire family laughing at the man who'd given them everything, he finally crossed it. The smell hit you the moment you walked through the front door. Roasted turkey, sage stuffing, cinnamon from the apple pie cooling on the counter. Sarah had outdone herself. The dining room table was set with the good china, the kind you only bring out twice a year. Candles flickered in silver holders. A playlist of soft jazz hummed in the background. Everything looked like a scene from a holiday catalogue. Margaret and I arrived right at 6, just like Sarah had asked. She met us at the door wearing a cream-colored sweater and dark slacks, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked happy, relaxed. She hugged her mother first, then me. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "Glad you could make it." Derek was in the living room, standing by the fireplace with a glass of red wine in his hand. He was talking to his brother, some guy who worked in finance and wore a watch that probably cost more than my truck. When he saw us, Derek raised his glass. "Robert, Margaret, welcome, welcome. Come in, get warm. Can I get you a drink?" I asked for water. Margaret asked for tea. Derek smirked, just a little, like our choices confirmed something he'd already decided about us. But he poured the drinks anyway, playing the gracious host. Tommy, my grandson, came running down the hallway. He's 7 years old, all energy and elbows. "Grandpa!" he shouted, crashing into my legs with a hug that nearly knocked me over. I ruffled his hair, feeling the tightness in my chest ease just a little. This was why I came. Not for Derek. Not even for Sarah, really, for Tommy. We sat down to eat around 7. The table was crowded. Sarah and Derek at the heads, Margaret and I on one side, Derek's brother and his wife on the other. Tommy squeezed in next to me, kicking his feet under the table, barely able to sit still. The conversation started light. Safe, weather, traffic, the new restaurant that opened downtown. But then Derek started talking about work. He always did. It was like a compulsion. He couldn't go more than 20 minutes without reminding everyone how important he was. "So we just closed a deal with a major distribution client," Derek said, leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Biggest contract our company's ever landed. We're talking multi-state logistics coordination. It's going to put us on the map." I kept eating. I didn't say anything, but I knew exactly which deal he was talking about. I knew because the distribution client he was bragging about was using infrastructure I'd built, routes I'd negotiated, contracts I'd signed 20 years ago that were still active, still generating revenue, still forming the backbone of the entire operation. But Derek didn't know that. He thought he'd discovered something new. He thought he was a pioneer. "Must be exciting," Margaret said politely, sipping her tea. "It is," Derek said, grinning. "It's the kind of deal that changes careers. I'm looking at a promotion, maybe even a partnership by next year." Sarah beamed at him. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "I'm so proud of you," she said. Derek looked at me then. It was a quick glance, but I caught it. There was something in his eyes, something smug, like he was waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to acknowledge his success, to admit that he'd surpassed me. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I just nodded. "That's great, Derek. Congratulations." He frowned, just a little, like my response wasn't enough, like he needed more. That's when he started poking, testing, pushing to see how far he could go. "You know, Robert," he said, setting his wine glass down, "you worked in logistics too, didn't you, back in the day?" "I did," I said. "What was that like?" he asked. But the way he asked it, the tone, it wasn't genuine curiosity. It was condescension. I mean, it must have been so different back then. No computers, no real-time tracking, just, clipboards and phone calls. I felt Margaret's hand on my knee under the table. A gentle squeeze. A warning. Don't engage. It was different, I said evenly, but it worked. Derek laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh. I'm sure it did. For its time. But man, I can't even imagine trying to run a modern operation like that. It's like comparing a typewriter to a laptop, you know? His brother laughed too. Sarah smiled, looking down at her plate. "Things change," I said. "That's how it goes." "They sure do," Derek said, leaning forward now, warming to his theme. "I mean, no offense, Robert, but that kind of work, it's basically obsolete now. Everything's automated. Everything's digital. The old ways, they just don't cut it anymore." I took a sip of water. I didn't respond. Derek kept going. He was on a roll now, feeding off the attention. I was telling Sarah the other day, it's crazy how much the industry has evolved. I mean, back when you were working, Robert, it was all manual labor, right? Driving trucks, loading freight, that kind of thing. Some of it, I said. Right, Derek said, nodding like he was a professor explaining something to a slow student. But now, it's all about strategy. It's about data. It's about relationships with high-level clients. It's a completely different game. He paused, taking another sip of wine. Then he said it, the thing that would change everything. I mean, let's be honest, Derek said, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. But your old job was a joke compared to what we do now. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people enjoying a meal, the sharp, cutting silence of a line being crossed. I looked at him. He was smiling, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to defend myself, to argue, to prove I was still relevant. I didn't. I just kept eating, slowly, deliberately. I cut another piece of turkey. I chewed. I swallowed. Margaret's hand tightened on my knee. Sarah cleared her throat. Derek, she said softly, it's Christmas. Let's not… What? Derek said, throwing his hands up. I'm just making conversation. I'm just saying, the world's moved on. That's not a bad thing. It's progress. His brother laughed again. He's got a point, Robert. No offense. But you guys had it rough back then. I set my fork down. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at her plate, her face flushed. She wasn't going to say anything. She wasn't going to defend me. She was going to let this happen. I looked at Tommy. He was watching me, his eyes wide, confused. He didn't understand what was happening. He just knew something was wrong. I picked up my fork again. I took another bite. I let them laugh. I let them think they'd won. Because the next morning, Derek was going to walk into a building he didn't know I owned. He was going to sit in a chair I paid for. And he was going to discover exactly what happens when you call a man's life's work a joke. Some revenge stories are loud. Some are violent. Mine was going to be silent, calculated, and absolutely devastating. The morning after that Christmas dinner, I woke up at 5 a.m. Old habits die hard. For 35 years, 5 a.m. was when the day started, when the trucks rolled out, when the routes got confirmed, when the real work began. I made coffee in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. Margaret was still asleep upstairs. The Christmas lights on the tree in the living room cast soft shadows on the walls. Everything looked peaceful, quiet. But my mind was anything but quiet. I kept hearing Derek's voice. Your old job was a joke. The laughter that followed. The way Sarah had looked down at her plate. Silent, complicit. The way nobody had defended me. Nobody had said, hey, that's not fair. Nobody had asked, do you actually know what he did? They didn't know. They never asked. And that was the problem. Let me tell you about my old job, the joke. The obsolete, manual labor, clipboards and phone calls job that apparently didn't matter anymore. I started in 1978. I was 23 years old, fresh out of a 2-year technical program, and I got hired as a dispatcher for a small freight company in Denver. My job was simple. Answer phones, coordinate pickups, make sure trucks got where they needed to go. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't prestigious. But I was good at it. I noticed things other people didn't notice. I noticed that certain routes were inefficient. I noticed that drivers were wasting time, wasting fuel, because nobody had bothered to map out the optimal paths. I noticed that clients were being charged the same rate whether their cargo went 10 miles or 100 miles, and that didn't make sense. So I started making suggestions. Small ones at first. What if we combined these two routes? What if we negotiated bulk rates with this supplier? What if we offered tiered pricing based on distance? My boss, a guy named Frank, he listened. He tried my ideas, and they worked. Within a year, The company's profit margins increased by 15%. Within 2 years, we doubled our client base. Frank promoted me to operations manager, then regional director. By the time I was 30, I was running the entire Rocky Mountain division. But I didn't stop there. I saw an opportunity. The deregulation of the trucking industry in 1980 had opened up the market. Small companies were popping up everywhere, but most of them didn't have the infrastructure to compete with the big players. They didn't have the network. They didn't have the relationships. But I did. I started making calls. I reached out to independent drivers, small fleet owners, warehouse operators. I offered them something nobody else was offering: coordination. A centralized system where they could plug into a larger network without losing their independence. I wasn't trying to buy them out, I was trying to connect them. By 1985, I had contracts with over 200 independent operators across 6 states. I wasn't driving the trucks anymore. I wasn't loading the freight. I was orchestrating the entire system. I was the conductor, and the trucks were my orchestra. And I was making money. Real money. Not the kind of money you brag about at parties, but the kind of money that builds security, that builds legacy. In 1990, I made a decision that would define the rest of my career. I bought property, commercial property, warehouses along major interstate corridors, land near freight hubs. I didn't buy them under my own name. I set up holding companies, LLCs with names that didn't mean anything to anyone. Mountain Ridge Logistics, High Plains Distribution, Rocky Summit Holdings. Nobody knew it was me. Nobody needed to know. I leased those properties back to the companies I was coordinating with. I charged fair rates, nothing predatory, but steady, reliable. And over the years, those properties appreciated. The land I bought for $50,000 in 1990 was worth $500,000 by 2010. But here's the thing. I never stopped working. Even after I sold the management rights to my coordination network in 2015, I retained ownership of the real estate. I retained the contracts. I retained the infrastructure. I retired from the day-to-day operations. Yes. I stopped answering phones at 5 a.m. I stopped flying to meetings in Salt Lake City and Albuquerque. But I didn't retire from the business. I just stepped back into the shadows. The network I built, it's still running. Every truck that rolls through Denver, every warehouse that stores freight along I-25, every distribution center that coordinates shipments across the Rockies, they're all connected to contracts I negotiated, leases I signed, infrastructure I built. And Derek's company, the one he's so proud of, the one that just landed that biggest contract ever, they're using my network. They're leasing warehouse space from one of my holding companies. They're routing shipments through corridors I established 30 years ago. He doesn't know it. His bosses probably don't even know it. The contracts are so old, so deeply embedded in the system, that they're just part of the landscape now, just part of how things work. But I know, I've always known. I sat at my kitchen table that morning, sipping my coffee, thinking about leverage. Real leverage isn't loud, it isn't flashy, it doesn't announce itself. Real leverage is quiet. It's patient. It waits in the foundation, invisible, until the moment you need it. And I was about to need it. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Bill Hendricks. He's the CEO of Apex Freight Solutions, the parent company that owns Derek's firm. Bill and I go way back. We worked together in the 90s. He knows exactly who I am and what I built. I sent him a text. Simple. Direct. Bill, need to discuss the Lawson account. Call me when you can. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Robert. Bill's voice was warm, familiar. It's been a while. What's going on? I need a favor, I said. Name it. Derek Lawson. He works for one of your subsidiaries, Vice President of Sales. Yeah, I know Derek. Cocky kid. Closes deals, though. What about him? I paused. I chose my words carefully. He's family, Bill. He married my daughter. There was silence on the other end. Then Bill laughed. No kidding. Small world. It is, I said. And here's the thing. Derek doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know what I built. He thinks I'm just some old guy who used to drive trucks. Bill laughed again, harder this time. You're serious? Dead serious. What do you need, Robert? I looked out the window. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day. I need you to set up a meeting, I said. Corporate review. Tell Derek that the ownership group wants to meet with him personally. Tell him it's about his big contract. Tell him they're impressed. Tell him this could be his shot at a promotion. Bill was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You want him to walk into a room thinking he's getting promoted, and then you're going to be sitting there. Exactly. That's cold, Robert. He called my life's work a joke, Bill, in front of my family, on Christmas. Bill sighed. When do you want this meeting? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Done. I'll send him the email tonight. He'll think it's the opportunity of a lifetime. Thanks, Bill. Robert, Bill said, his voice serious now. What are you planning to do? I thought about that question. What was I planning to do? I wasn't going to fire him. I wasn't going to humiliate him publicly. I wasn't going to destroy his career out of spite. I was just going to show him the truth. The truth about who I was. The truth about what I'd built. The truth about the foundation he'd been standing on while he mocked the man who laid it. I'm going to teach him a lesson, I said, about respect. The email arrived in Derek's inbox at exactly 8:30 p.m. on Christmas night. I know because Bill sent me a screenshot. The subject line read, Urgent, Executive Review Meeting, your attendance required. The body of the email was short, professional, and perfectly baited. Derek, the ownership group has reviewed your recent contract closure with Mountain Ridge Distribution. They are extremely impressed with your performance and would like to meet with you personally to discuss your future with the company. This is a rare opportunity. Please arrive at the executive suite, 15th floor, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Dress accordingly. This meeting could change your career trajectory. Congratulations on getting their attention. I imagined Derek reading that email. I imagined the way his eyes would light up, the way he'd show it to Sarah, his voice filled with that familiar arrogance. See? I told you. They finally see what I'm worth. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. I'd been ready for years, really. I just hadn't known it until Derek gave me a reason. At 6 a.m., I was already awake. I showered, shaved carefully, and opened my closet. In the back, behind the flannel shirts and the worn jeans, hung a garment bag I hadn't touched in 3 years. I unzipped it slowly. Inside was a charcoal gray suit, custom-tailored, Italian wool. I'd had it made in 2015 for the closing ceremony when I sold the management rights to my network. I'd worn it once. It still fit perfectly. I put it on. White shirt, crisp and pressed. Navy tie with a subtle pattern. Black leather shoes that I'd polished the night before until they gleamed. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the retired handyman from the suburbs. He was the founder, the architect, the man who'd built an empire while everyone else was sleeping. Margaret came into the bedroom. She stopped in the doorway, her hand going to her mouth. Robert, she whispered. You look different, I asked. Powerful, she said. I kissed her forehead. I'll be home by lunch. Are you sure about this? She asked, her eyes searching mine. I thought about that question. Was I sure? Was I really going to walk into that building and pull back the curtain? Was I really going to show Derek, show Sarah, show everyone exactly who I was? I'm sure, I said. I drove the Silverado. I could have called a car service. I could have shown up in something flashy. But that wasn't the point. The point wasn't to impress Derek with money. The point was to show him that the man he'd dismissed, the man he'd mocked, the man whose work he'd called a joke, that man had been holding the keys the entire time. The Apex Freight Solutions headquarters was a 12-story glass and steel building on the edge of downtown Denver. I'd driven past it 100 times. I'd never been inside, never needed to be. The building itself sat on land I didn't own, but the distribution network it relied on, that was mine. I parked in the visitor lot. I walked through the lobby. The receptionist looked up, saw my suit, and immediately straightened. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "I have a meeting on the 15th floor," I said. "Executive suite." She checked her computer. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Hayes?" "That's right. They're expecting you. Take the elevator on the right. It goes directly to the executive level." I rode the elevator alone. The doors were polished chrome. I could see my reflection. I looked calm. I felt calm. This wasn't anger anymore. This was clarity. The doors opened onto a hallway that screamed money, dark wood paneling, recessed lighting, artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. At the end of the hall was a set of double doors with frosted glass. Through the glass, I could see shadows moving, voices, muffled but distinct. I checked my watch. 8:55. I was early. Good. I pushed through the doors. The conference room was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 20 people, made of some dark wood that gleamed under the overhead lights. At the head of the table sat Bill Hendricks. He stood when he saw me, a smile spreading across his face. "Robert," he said, walking over to shake my hand, "it's been too long." "It has," I said. "Coffee," he offered. "Please." We sat. We talked. Not about Derek, not about the meeting, just two old friends catching up. Bill told me about his grandkids. I told him about Tommy. We talked about the industry, about how things had changed, about the young guys coming up who thought they'd invented logistics. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. "And that'll be him," Bill said. He pressed a button on the conference phone. "Come in." The door opened. Derek walked in. He was wearing his best suit, navy blue, probably cost him $2,000. His shoes were polished. His hair was perfect. He had a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He looked like a man walking into the biggest moment of his career. He saw Bill first. His face lit up. "Mr. Hendricks," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you so much for this opportunity. I can't tell you how much I appreciate." Then he saw me. He stopped mid-sentence. His hand was still extended toward Bill, but his eyes were locked on me. Confusion flickered across his face, then recognition, then something else, something that looked like panic. "Robert," he said. His voice was uncertain, thin. What are you doing here?" I didn't stand. I didn't rush to explain. I just looked at him. Let him stand there. Let him wonder. Bill cleared his throat. "Derek, please, have a seat." Derek didn't move. He was still staring at me. "I don't understand. This is a corporate meeting. This is about my contract. Why is my father-in-law here?" "Sit down, Derek," Bill said again. This time it wasn't a suggestion. Derek sat, slowly. He placed his portfolio on the table, but his hands were shaking slightly. He kept glancing between Bill and me, trying to piece together what was happening. Bill leaned back in his chair. "Derek, you've been with us for what, 5 years now?" "6, Derek said quickly. 6 years, and I've consistently exceeded my targets. My close rate is—" "I know your numbers," Bill interrupted. "They're good. That's why we wanted to meet with you." Derek relaxed slightly. "Thank you. I've worked really hard to—" "Tell me about the Mountain Ridge contract," Bill said. Derek's face brightened. This was his moment, his chance to shine. "It's a game changer, sir. Multi-state distribution coordination. We're talking about a network that spans from Montana to New Mexico. It's the biggest deal I've ever closed. Honestly, it's the biggest deal our division has ever seen." "And how did you close it?" Bill asked. "Relationships," Derek said confidently. "I identified the key decision makers. I presented a solution that addressed their pain points. I negotiated terms that worked for both parties. It's what I do. It's what I'm good at. Bill nodded slowly. And do you know who owns Mountain Ridge Distribution? Derek blinked. It's a holding company, I think. One of those old legacy operations. The ownership is pretty opaque. Why? Bill looked at me. He nodded. I leaned forward. I placed my hands flat on the table. I looked Derek in the eye. I own it, I said. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a pause in conversation. The crushing, suffocating silence of a world collapsing. Derek stared at me. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. What? Mountain Ridge Distribution, I said slowly. Rocky Summit Holdings, High Plains, Logistics. I own all of them. I built them 30 years ago. And the contract you're so proud of, you didn't close it, Derek. You inherited it. You're using infrastructure I created before you even graduated college. Derek's face went white, actually, white, like all the blood had drained out of him. That's not possible, he stammered. It's not only possible, Bill said. It's documented. Robert Hayes is the founder and majority stakeholder in the distribution network your entire division relies on. He's been the silent partner in this company's success for decades. Derek looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him 6 years ago, he saw me. Not the old man in the flannel shirt, not the retired handyman. He saw the architect, the foundation, the man whose work he'd called a joke. You, Derek's voice cracked. You never said anything. You never asked, I replied. Derek sat there, frozen. His hands were flat on the table, but I could see them trembling. His breathing had changed, shallow, quick, like a man who just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff he didn't know existed. Bill stood up, walking over to a cabinet against the wall. He pulled out a thick folder, the kind that holds years of documentation. He placed it on the table in front of Derek. The sound of it hitting the wood was heavy. Final. This, Bill said, tapping the folder, is the complete ownership structure of the distribution network your division uses. Every warehouse, every route, every contract. It all traces back to holding companies established between 1985 and 2005. And every single one of those companies is owned by the man sitting across from you. Derek opened the folder with shaking hands. I watched his eyes scan the pages, corporate filings, property deeds, lease agreements. His name appeared on some of the documents, signatures on contracts he'd signed over the years, thinking he was dealing with some faceless corporate entity. He didn't know he'd been signing agreements with me. This can't be right, Derek whispered. He flipped through more pages, faster now, desperate to find something that would make this make sense. I've been working these accounts for 6 years. I've built relationships with these clients. I negotiated these terms. You negotiated within parameters that were set 30 years ago, I said. My voice was calm, steady. The rates you charge. I established those rate structures in 1992. The routes you use. I mapped those corridors in 1988. The warehouse space you lease to clients. I bought that property in 1995 for $200,000. It's worth $4 million now. Derek looked up at me. His face had gone from white to red. Anger was replacing shock. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell Sarah? We've been married for 6 years, and you never once mentioned that you owned half the logistics infrastructure in the Rocky Mountains. You never asked, I repeated. You never asked what I did. You never asked how I built my career. You assumed. You saw an old man in a flannel shirt driving an old truck, and you decided that was all I was. You decided my work was a joke. The word hung in the air between us. Joke. The same word he'd used at Christmas dinner. The same word that had made my entire family laugh. Derek's jaw tightened. I was just making conversation. I didn't mean, you meant it, I interrupted. You meant every word. You've been meaning it for 6 years. Every little comment, every dismissive look, every time you checked your phone while I was talking. You thought I was irrelevant. You thought I was obsolete. You thought the world had moved on without me. I leaned forward. But here's what you didn't understand, Derek. The world didn't move on without me. The world moved on top of me, on top of the foundation I built. You've been walking on my floors, driving on my roads, using my network, and calling it your success. Bill sat back down. He pulled out another document from the folder. Derek, this is the lease agreement for the warehouse space in Colorado Springs, the one you use for your biggest client. Do you recognize this signature? Derek looked at the document. His eyes found the signature line at the bottom. It was my signature, Robert Hayes, clear as day. That's a 20-year lease, Bill continued, signed in 2005, renewed automatically every 5 years. You've been paying rent to Robert's holding company since the day you started working here. You just didn't know it. Derek's hands were shaking harder now. He pushed the folder away like it was contaminated. This is insane. This is... Sarah doesn't know about this, does she? No, I said. She doesn't, because I never told her. I wanted her to build her own life. I wanted her to find a man who loved her for who she was, not for what I could give her. I wanted to see who would show up when they thought there was nothing to gain. I let that sink in. Let him understand what I was really saying. And you showed up, Derek, I continued. You showed up with your leased Tesla and your practiced smile and your quarterly bonuses. You showed up thinking you were marrying up, marrying into a simple family with a modest background. And you spent 6 years reminding me, in 1,000 small ways, that I wasn't good enough, that my work didn't matter, that I was just some relic from a bygone era. Derek stood up suddenly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. This is some kind of power trip. You're trying to humiliate me because I made one comment at Christmas dinner. Sit down, Bill said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Authority. We're not finished. Derek remained standing. I'm a vice president at this company. I've closed millions of dollars in contracts. You can't just... You're a vice president who works in a building that pays rent to Robert's holding company, Bill said flatly. You're a vice president whose entire client portfolio depends on infrastructure Robert built. You're a vice president because Robert's network made it possible for you to succeed. Derek looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was cracking. What was left was something raw, something desperate. What do you want? He asked. His voice was quiet now, defeated. You want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made that comment. I'm sorry if I disrespected you. Is that what you want to hear? I don't want your apology, I said. An apology means nothing when it's forced. When it's given out of fear instead of genuine remorse. Then what? Derek's voice rose again. What do you want from me, Robert? You want me to quit? You want me to tell Sarah her father is some secret millionaire who's been playing games with us for years? I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. I walked around the table until I was standing right next to him, close enough that he had to look up at me. I want you to understand something, I said quietly. And respect isn't something you give because someone has money. Respect isn't something you give because someone has power. Respect is something you give because someone earned it, because they built something, because they sacrificed, because they showed up every single day for 35 years and did the work, even when nobody was watching. I paused. I didn't build this network for applause. I didn't build it for recognition. I built it so my daughter could have a better life than I did, so my grandson could grow up without the struggles I faced. And you walked into that life, enjoyed the benefits of everything I built, and called it a joke. Derek's eyes were wet now. Not quite tears, but close. I didn't know. he whispered. That's the problem, I said. You didn't know because you never cared to know. You never asked. You never looked past the surface. You saw what you wanted to see, and you treated me accordingly. I stepped back. I looked at Bill. I'm not firing him. I'm not taking his job. That's not why I'm here. Bill nodded. He'd known that from the beginning. I looked back at Derek. But I am drawing a line. You will never speak to me that way again. You will never dismiss my work. You will never mock what I built. And if you ever disrespect my wife or my family again, you won't just lose your job, Derek. You'll lose access to every warehouse, every route, every contract in this network. I'll pull the foundation out from under you so fast you won't even have time to fall. Derek nodded. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. Now go home, I said. Go home and think about what you learned today. Think about the man you thought I was, and the man I actually am. And when you're ready, when you've actually processed this, we'll talk again, as family. But until then, you stay away from my house. Derek picked up his portfolio. He walked to the door. He stopped, his hand on the handle. He turned back. Does Sarah know you're doing this? She'll know soon enough, I said. And when she does, you better hope you've figured out how to be a better man. Because if you haven't, she's going to figure it out too. Derek left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Bill and I stood there in silence for a moment. Then he laughed. A low, rumbling sound. That was brutal, Robert. It needed to be, I said. What happens now? I looked out the window at the city below, at the roads and buildings and infrastructure that connected everything. The invisible network that made modern life possible. Oh no, I said. We wait. We wait and see if he learns. If he grows. If he becomes the kind of man my daughter deserves. And if he doesn't. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who'd built an empire in silence and could dismantle one just as quietly. Then the foundation crumbles, I said, and he goes down with it. 6 months passed. 6 months of silence. 6 months where Derek didn't show up at family dinners, didn't call, didn't text. Sarah called me once, 3 weeks after that meeting. Her voice was tight, confused. Dad, Derek told me something. Something about you owning companies. About the meeting. Is it true? I told her it was. I told her everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, I need time to process this. I said, take all the time you need. She hung up, and for 6 months, I didn't hear from her. Margaret worried. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if we'd lost our daughter forever. But I knew better. I knew Sarah needed to see the truth for herself. She needed to watch Derek without me in the picture. She needed to see if he'd change, if he'd grow, or if he'd stay the same arrogant man who'd mocked her father at Christmas dinner. And then, on a Saturday morning in June, there was a knock on my door. I opened it. Sarah stood there. Alone. No Derek, no Tommy, just her. She looked different. Thinner. Tired. But her eyes were clear. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room. Margaret brought tea. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Sarah said, I filed for divorce yesterday. My heart stopped. Sarah, let me finish, Dad, she said. Her voice was steady, strong. I spent 6 months watching him, really watching him. And you know what I saw? I saw a man who was angry. Not at himself. At you. He was angry that you had power he didn't know about. He was angry that you'd embarrassed him. He was angry that he couldn't control the narrative anymore. He never once said he was sorry for what he said to you. He never once asked how you built what you built. He just resented you for it. She looked at me, and I realized something. I've been living with a man who only loved me when I made him look good. Who only valued me when I stayed small and quiet and didn't challenge him, just like I did at that Christmas dinner. I sat there and let him humiliate you because I was afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of losing the life I thought I had. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But that life was built on a lie, Dad. And you showed me that. You didn't destroy my marriage. You just turned on the lights. And I finally saw what was really there. I stood up. I walked over to my daughter. I pulled her into my arms, and she sobbed. Real, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Margaret joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us. We stood there, the three of us, holding each other in the quiet living room. When Sarah finally pulled back, she wiped her face. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "It's going to be hard. Tommy's confused. The lawyers are expensive. I'm going to have to figure out how to stand on my own. But I'm going to be okay, because I'm your daughter, and if you could build an empire in silence, I can rebuild my life in the light." I smiled. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah." She nodded. "I know that now." She stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me what real strength looks like, for teaching me that respect isn't given, it's earned." I watched her walk to her car. She didn't look back at the house with longing. She looked forward, toward whatever came next. And as I closed the door, I realized something. Some jobs look small until the world realizes who was holding it together. Some men look ordinary until you see the foundation they built. And some families fall apart so they can be rebuilt stronger. This was my family revenge. Not loud, not violent, just the quiet, devastating truth. And in the end, the truth was enough. Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice and redemption.